Once again, we thank you for the opportunity to be together and to hear from you. And pray for Phil now. Thank you for what you've laid on his heart and for your word. And I pray that you would inspire him now to communicate in a way that brings your word alive to us. Amen.
Thank you, Anne. Good morning to those of you who are joining us on the live stream this morning. It's great to have you with us, and you're joining with many hundreds of people at Kingsbrook and Broughton Church. Well, not quite. At Kingsbrook and Broughton Church this morning. It's great to have you with us. My name's Phil White. I'm the vicar of the church, and it's my pleasure this morning to speak to you about Easter and Jesus' resurrection. And we've been looking as a church since Christmas at telling a better story. And the whole idea is that the world is telling us all sorts of stories about if you get this hair product or whatever, you get this, you get that, and you get this car, you'll be happy forever. And I don't believe that. I've experienced those things, and I know they don't bring you happiness. And what we're trying to say is that actually we have a better story that we can tell. So today is part of that. 34 years ago, nearly, our youngest son was born, Thomas. And it was a slow labour, I seem to remember. And I remember at one point, there was just myself and Anne in the delivery room in the hospital in Nottingham. And suddenly, Anne was wanting to push. And the midwife had said, no, it's going to be hours yet. And suddenly, she said, I've got to push. So Anne, breathe. You've all done it, most of you anyway. And so I shouted for the midwife. She came running in. I said, she wants to push. She can't be ready to push. It's hours yet. Anyway, she examined Anne. She said, you're right. Anyway, she's coming quick. She said, press the buzzer on the wall. Well, I pressed everything on the wall. I got the oxygen. I got everything. Anyway, eventually the doctor came, the other midwives came, and Thomas was born very quickly at that point. But I remember when we rang my mum, you had to do it by the landline in those days, if you remember those things, and I rang my mum and told her that Thomas had been born, and his name was Thomas David White. And I shall never forget what my mum said. She said, oh, why didn't you call him David Thomas White? Because Thomas, doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about Thomas. And I want to put a different side over about Thomas. I don't think we should remember him as doubting Thomas. And just to whet your appetite, I've got two questions which I'm going to ask you later on, which I want you to consider. But I'm going to wait for that for a moment. But shall we read that passage from John chapter 20, verses 24 to 29? This is the story of Jesus appearing to Thomas. If you remember, Jesus has appeared to the rest of the disciples, and Thomas wasn't there. And Thomas, this is the account of when Jesus appears later. Now, Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we've seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. And then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. It's a very good and appropriate passage for us because none of us have seen the risen Jesus. Probably most of us haven't anyway. Thomas, apart from being called Doubting Thomas, I think Thomas was a genuine searching person. He wanted his own faith. He wanted a first-hand faith. He wanted to see it for himself. He wasn't satisfied with a second-hand one that the disciples told him about. He wants a personal faith, not somebody else's. And I'm absolutely convinced that during that 7 days between when Jesus appeared to the rest of the disciples and then appeared to Thomas. During those 7 days, I'm sure the other disciples said, Thomas, it's true. We saw him. We saw his wounds. I'm absolutely convinced of it. But it wasn't quite enough for poor old Thomas. Now, I want to talk a little bit about testimony or stories. Now, that we sometimes, Anne talked about earlier, we often in our services, we ask people, come and tell us a story of what God's doing. And they are really, really important times because, as Bill Johnson, an American church leader, said, testimony reveals the nature of God. I like that. Testimony reveals the nature of God. So when you hear a story from the front, the danger is you think, I don't have that story. I can't match that. Instead, think, that is something about God, and celebrate that. You know, for the last 25, 30 years, 40 years probably as a Christian, I have always wanted to see a leg lengthen. A miracle of a leg lengthen. I wanted to see somebody lying down with one short leg by about 6 inches and the other leg normal length. And I wanted to see the leg extend. I wanted to see that. And I sensed that God was saying to me, Phil, I'm not going to show you that because I want you to believe. And that's important because none of us have seen Jesus resurrected from the dead. We weren't part of that 500. But we still can believe. I don't know whether you've ever heard someone, Andrew was telling me a story the other week. He'd gone to a conference. You might have heard similar stories. Someone goes to a conference, a healing conference maybe, and they tell you of a healing that happened. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I struggle. I find it difficult to believe. I find it difficult to join in the celebration for that person. I'm not wanting to be cynical, I just struggle sometimes. It would have been easier if I'd been there at the conference with Andrew, where Andrew told me about a miracle. It would have been easier if I'd seen it. And it would have been even easier if it had happened to me. So the danger is with testimony, the further we get away, as it were, the more and more difficult it is. Now, at this stage, I'm going to take a bit of a risk. My 4 volunteers, who I volunteered to help, would you come out, please? Earlier. What's that? You got a lot of choice. Yeah. Come into the middle. Now, will you tell me what we did in the little room near the front of the school?
It was amazing. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed you'd done it.
Now, do you believe him? Okay, thanks, Dave. That's very good, very good. Tracy, what did I do?
So you produced a banana.
Yeah.
And you also produced a knife.
Yes.
The knife wasn't particularly sharp. It was just a bread knife.
Yeah, and don't tell the whole story. What did I do? Just because I'm going to do it in a minute.
You sliced it.
I sliced it.
Amazing.
Was. Absolutely.
What was special about the slicing of the banana?
Well, the knife actually didn't go through the banana.
Okay. And Derek, when did I slice the banana?
At the beginning.
At the beginning?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was it after I peeled it then?
Before.
Before
you peeled it.
Before.
Okay. They're saying that I sliced a banana before I peeled it. Do you believe them? They're really not sure. Okay, you can go and sit down. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. Well done. Whew, I'm all pumped up this morning because I've been excited about this one. 3 standard bananas, yeah? Happy with those? Yeah, okay. Well, Rick doesn't like bananas, obviously. Standard bananas, they're getting a little bit bruised now. I think they got a bit bruised in my bag here. I'm going to come close to the camera because I want the camera to see this. Now, I like to peel my bananas. I like to cut my bananas before I peel them. All right? So, what I want you to do, all of you, I want you to concentrate. Jenny, I can see you concentrating there. Good, that's really good. I'm going to place the knife on there. Concentrate. Yep, that's done. Okay. This one's going to take a little bit longer. Yep, that's done. The great thing about peeling a banana, cutting a banana before you peel it is the knife stays completely clean. It's really good. Now watch. Sam, the concentration on your face is amazing. For you, Jack. And the small bit in the middle. You can even see the cut marks of the knife. How many people are gobsmacked? Oh, come on. We've got 1, 2, thank you, Chris, thank you. Do you see the issue that we're dealing with in this passage with Thomas? These 4, they were right up close, so they saw it, and you don't know how I did it, do you? They really don't know how I did it. They saw the banana sliced before I peeled it. They were convinced it was going to happen. You weren't. You thought I was having you on. But when you see it for yourself, it changes things. And that's something important about Thomas. I'm sure that Thomas wanted to believe. But he was probably saying to him, no, it was impossible. Jesus can't have risen from the dead. And yet all his friends were saying, they were full of it. They were telling him all about it. And I guess Thomas is saying, well, what do? I don't know what to do. I just don't know how to think about this. He was asking himself maybe the question, how do I believe? And if you note in the passage we read, it was 7 days between Jesus appearing to the first disciples and then Jesus appearing to Thomas. And during that time, that would have been a real wrestling of faith, I think. Now, I said that I've got 2 questions for you. This is not the question, but why, in my mind, I'm trying to ask the question, why was Thomas absent? Why wasn't he there with the disciples that first day of the week when Jesus appeared to the rest of the disciples? Why wasn't he there? I have no idea. It doesn't tell us why Thomas wasn't there. If he'd been there, I'm sure there would have been none of that agonizing of faith for that week. But, if he had been there, we would have missed out on a vital lesson which Jesus, I think, is trying to teach us. Jesus said at the end of that passage, "Blessed are you who believe even though you haven't seen," and that's us. So here's my first question. My first question for you, I'd like you to answer this yourself. Don't speak it out. We'll just have a moment's pause after it. The first question is, are you absent? Are you absent from the things of God? So, for example, when we have a worship evening, Rick and Sam lead a worship evening once a month on a Sunday night at Moore. Most of the church doesn't come. Are you absent? Sunday by Sunday, are you absent? Prayer meetings, are you absent? Going to Moore for the social times we have on a Saturday or days in the week, are you absent? Let me take it even further. New Wine. Many of us have been to New Wine over recent years, well, not over the last 4 years or so. Have you been absent from those times? And the reason I ask those questions is not to put guilt on you and not to pressurize you to be here every Sunday and to be here every prayer meeting. But the reason we're doing all these things is so that we can experience Jesus. So are you absent? Are you missing times with Jesus? Are you missing times with the body of Christ, as we're called? Are you missing those times? That's my first question. I know what it's like to be absent, and I was absent for many years. I was still a Christian, still went to church, but I was absent a lot of the time. And actually what built up in me was resentment, mistrust, of other people. When I saw people raising their arms, I thought, you're making it up. And skepticism. I really wasn't sure whether this whole thing was real or not, because I was absent. And I know what it's like. I know what it feels like. I often felt distant from God. Faith feels irrelevant to daily life. Nothing of God satisfies. And you start to question whether God exists. And the trouble is, you can't motivate yourself to be present, because being absent means you get colder and colder and colder. There's an analogy they've described of a charcoal fire. And the charcoals, they're all, for a barbecue, they're all glowing red. You take one of them out of the fire and it goes black pretty much straight away. It cools down because it's absent. You put it back, it gets hot again. My first question is, are you absent? Have you been absent? Going on to the second question. This is an interesting fact. I don't know whether you saw this in the passage, but Thomas, the name Thomas is an Aramaic name. It's the everyday language that they spoke, and it means twin. And the same word twin is also in Greek, Didymus. Did you notice it says Thomas also named Didymus? Didymus in Greek means twin. Thomas in Aramaic means twin. Here's my second question. Am I, Thomas's twin? Just like Thomas was absent, are you and I absent? There's a man called Tyler Staton who took over from John Mark Comer at Bridgetown Community Church in Portland, Oregon, in America. And Tyler's written a book called Searching for Enough. And his book is founded on the idea that we are all Thomas's twin. Because Thomas was absent, he missed it. That actually we are often the same. We all need to know the truth of Jesus' resurrection. The trouble is that most of us don't have the proof that Thomas eventually had. And the comfort is that in verse 29, as I've already said, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." That's you and me, by the way. Are you Thomas's twin? Are you faithful but also doubtful? Are you sometimes absent? And sometimes, like me, you're saying under your breath, I can't believe this until I see it. I wanted to see a leg lengthening in order to make my faith solid. I'm too much like Thomas's twin. I know that. What about you? Just to conclude then, recognize that maybe all of us are Thomas's twin. We are the twin of Thomas. We're so like Thomas in many ways. And ask yourselves if you are or have been absent, because it will affect your spiritual life. You're absent from the fire, you'll cool down, you go out eventually. And what I would encourage us to do, we're going to move into communion now, once we've stopped the stream. But in communion, what I would encourage you to do is come and get the bread and wine first. And then maybe if there can be other people towards the front who can just pray. If you're happy to pray, just come and station yourselves down at each side. And as you go back towards your seat, just go hold the bread and the wine out in front of you. And just let someone pray for you. And what you're saying, in effect, is, I'm too much like Thomas's twin, and I know I've been absent. God, will you come close? Enable me to come close to you. It's a simple prayer. You don't need to spend long there, but then go back to your seat. If you're being prayed for when we eat the bread and the wine, then do that with us, but then carry on praying. So if there's a few people who would be happy to pray down each side, the prayer team, that'd be great. I'll say goodbye to the stream now, but thank you ever so much. I'll do it, Jack, don't worry. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Can I encourage you on the stream to listen to a song called I've Witnessed It, which is sung by Jen Johnson and Melody Malone. And it's a beautiful song, and it's all about the fact that with things we have witnessed, we will tell other people about. I don't think we're going to have time to listen to it this morning, but do look at it on the stream if you're able to. And thank you for joining us, and I wish you a very happy Easter.